Hello and welcome to WriterSpeak, dedicated to the written word and those who produce it. I'm your host, Jeane Slone. I'm the author of 2 historical fictions, She Flew Bombers and She Built Ships During World War II. Today in the studio, I would like to introduce Ray Anderson, who wrote the mystery thriller Lotus Cross. Welcome to WriterSpeak, Ray.
Thank you, Jeannie. It's good to be here.
It's so wonderful to have you on our show. I just love the title of your book and the cover.
Thank you.
It's pretty amazing. Tell me, did somebody in particular design this cover? How did that come about?
Well, I was going through a process of finding an illustrator, and it was a process, but I wanted somebody to do it the way I wanted it done for a specific reason, because the Lotus Cross is designed to have a pouch actually inside of it, and it's all integral to the finding of the Lotus Cross itself.
Which is what it says in the book.
Exactly,
Yeah.
And so I was directed to Dark Planet Publishing in Escondido, and Armando, the illustrator there, worked with me, and I'm very satisfied with what he came up with.
He did an amazing job because your eye is just drawn to it. He made it very exciting looking.
Yes, yes, exactly, yeah. And I'm very, very pleased with how much he followed my instruction about how I wanted it to lay out.
It's so fortunate, I know, if you can't draw yourself. You want to draw it yourself, but you can't draw it yourself. It's so wonderful to find somebody who can listen to what you're saying and then be able to put it on paper.
Exactly, yes. I'm very, very pleased with it.
Well, give us a short synopsis of your book. Not too much, because we certainly want people to buy your book and read it, but just give us a little teaser.
Right. It's a historical novel, a thriller full of mystery and adventure. And just like it says, it spans 2,000 years in 3 continents. The origin of the Lotus Cross, and now this is all from my imagination. The Lotus Cross was designed by St. Thomas the Apostle when he went to India. And there was a specific reason that he did that, because when he, at the time of the resurrection, he was the only person, according to biblical historical facts, that touched the risen Christ. He was the doubting Thomas. And Jesus said, "Stick your hand into my side that you know it is I." So I have it that he removes his hand out of the wound in Christ's side and clutches a pouch that he carries around his neck with the name of God in it. And then he has that preserved, takes it to India, and creates the Lotus Cross to house the pouch. 600 years later, it ends up in China, and then 150 years later, it's lost to time. And so now in present time, an archaeologist comes across it by way of his brother-in-law, and it's a manuscript describing the Lotus Cross. So the adventure begins with the finding of the Lotus Cross. And
this is about one of your characters, Professor Michael Drake, is that correct?
He's the protagonist of the book.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the professor.
Well, the professor evolved, I have it in my preface, but my family had a tragedy 5.5 years ago. My daughter died at the age of 37. It was a number of things. She went into a coma. She had been sick for a while and died peacefully without ever regaining consciousness. I was writing a book at that time, this book, and she was one of my biggest supporters in doing that. Well, I went into a tailspin for a year. This was 2008, and I didn't even write anything. I hardly did anything else either. But when I reopened the book to get back into it, I gave my protagonist, Michael Drake, a wife who died a year before. And then I could relate to him again. And out of that, this book evolved from that.
And it probably makes it more real.
Well, it certainly did for me. And during this process, and since that time, it's been part of my catharsis, part of my healing process, part of coming to grips with my own loss, and in honoring the fact that my daughter was such a supporter of me. So I was thrilled to have it published. In fact, the day it got published was this year in 2013, on the date of her passing. So
that is
yeah,
interesting.
and it was very telling. It was a very poignant moment for me and my family.
You have really such little control over when the exact date will be.
I honestly, it just evolved that became the real date that it was going to happen. And I was always pushing to have it happen earlier, nothing to do with that date, but it just turned out that was it. That's how it came down.
That's almost an eerie spiritual statement.
And, you know, and it was very touching for me to then share it with my family, you know, being able to come back that day with copies. I drove down and got them and was able to give them copies actually on that day.
Yeah.
And so it was very touching for me and for my family.
Did you do a lot of research in order to write this book? I know you have a large background in being a minister, but besides your background, did you do specific research for this book?
Well, interestingly enough, this book evolved out of my doing research on a different matter. I had heard of the Jesus Sutras, and for whatever reason, I had never studied it. So I did some research, found two great books. They're in my references about recommended reading on my website. The Jesus Sutras and the Lost Sutras of Jesus. And they're both fascinating reads, and they actually talk about the Eastern influence on the Bible and on Christianity. Not so much the Bible, not the Bible at all, but Christianity, and how it evolved in the East differently than it did in the West. And it's a fascinating read about, it goes into the ancient caravan routes, and I was so fascinated with it that my book kind of evolved out of that research. And so I wanted to acknowledge both those authors, and I did, you know, and I put them in my in acknowledgement as recommended reading.
I thought it was really wonderful that in the back of your book you have a section of recommended readings. I think it really adds to your book.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tell me, who was your favorite character in the book and why?
It depends on how I was viewing it at the time. My favorite character is Professor Michael Drake, because he's the one. He's the one who carries the grieving process during he's a year out when this all happens, and but I think the most interesting character in the book is Rasha, the femme fatale, a Russian beauty who has a propensity for mayhem.
Mm-hmm. You have quite a variety of characters, and that really adds to making it a very fascinating read.
Thank you.
I was wondering, did you have a specific message you were trying to get across with your thriller?
Yes. The short answer is yes. But I wanted it to be something that evolved which it did, the book ended up writing me. As many authors have said, I found out firsthand how that works.
That you think you know what you're going to write.
Yes.
But it ends up having a mind of its own, and it takes its own journey.
It absolutely does. And so wait, what was the question again?
Did you have a specific message that you were trying to get across?
Oh, yes, I absolutely, and that's what evolved. The message was about the resurrection of consciousness, the resurrection of hope. That, you know, I wanted it to be uplifting. And interestingly enough, as I was finishing the first final draft, where it was coming to the end, I didn't have an end. I didn't know how it ended, and I struggled with it. You know, people would call it writer's block, but I just stayed with it, struggled with it, and something happened. People have talked about the muse and that. Whatever happened, I broke through, and the ending kind of laid itself out for me. And I remember one night sitting there just stuck, so to speak, and I remember saying to myself, well, thank you for sharing being stuck. Something's going on and it's more interesting on the page, in the computer. And so I was finding out a lot of information as it was spilling out of me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense to me that you think it's going to end this way, but it's like it has a mind of its own.
It took on a life of its own.
A life of its own, yeah.
And
yeah.
You know, and I think the ending is uplifting, and that was very important for me to have it ending on an up note, and it certainly does.
Yeah, it does. What makes this book different than other religious thrillers?
It's not religious per se. I mean, the Lotus Cross is...
and so that makes it different. Somebody will think this is going to be a religious book just because it says cross.
Right, and it's not that. It has historical references to Christ and to St. Thomas and to a secret order in India. But other than that, it's really a thriller. It's really fast-paced. I've been told a number of times that it's really custom-made to be a movie. And I'm certainly open to that possibility.
Yeah, that's where movies come from. I think it's good for all of us authors to know that. Most movies come from books. That's what's behind the movies.
Yes.
So having your book become a movie makes sense to me.
Well, a backdrop on that was years ago, a friend of mine was doing a movie down in, he actually produced a movie, and he was doing the final shoot, and I went down there to support him. And it was somewhere in LA, and they were using a floor and had extras there. And I talked to a couple people that were in the industry, and I was thinking of becoming a screenwriter at the time, just toying with the idea. And one of the guys said, everybody's got a screenplay in LA. Write a book if you want to get a movie made.
I've heard that writing a screenplay of your own book yourself doesn't necessarily make it a movie, because if your book is really good, they will write the screenplay. A lot of authors think, oh, well, now if I write a screenplay, it will automatically become a movie. And it doesn't necessarily go that way.
Right. I really don't have an interest in writing a screenplay myself. I'm going to be concentrating, once the audiobook is done, on I would call it the sequel to this. And it's already begun, but I'm just immersed still in this first book and getting it promoted, and as we are right here, you know. I would not consider that right now.
Where did you get the inspiration for the characters in your book?
They evolved very much in the same way that Professor Michael Drake evolved out of his grief. Kind of permeates the way the characters relate to him and to each other, for that matter. And especially he has Julia Carter is his associate, and they are toying with getting closer, but he's not ready. And a year out, he wouldn't be ready. I had at first tried to instill more of a romantic connection between them, but as it evolved and as I was having it edited, it became very clear he wasn't ready for this yet. So
that's the life of its own.
Exactly. It took on that life of its own, where I had to realize that, wow, I wasn't, a year out. I knew where I was at the time, and I wouldn't be ready for anything like that to, just get into that. He's still grieving the loss of his wife. And Julia knew him from his days in Berkeley when she was a graduate student years before. And he brought her on board 3 months after his wife, Karen, had died. And she was helping him for the last 9 months. So she was very sympathetic and empathetic to where he was at, and a big support for him throughout the book.
That's what makes that's the difference between a good book and a bad book to me, is maybe you're writing a fiction, but you make it more real, instead of saying, well, my wife died, and then the next day I got remarried,
Exactly, yes. Yeah, I didn't have it quite like that, but I had it more, I was humbled by the process, realizing, and I have to honor his truth, which is, that's what we all want, is somebody telling the truth.
Before, I would like you to read a passage from your book. It would be good for everybody to hear about your very interesting background.
Oh, I actually was introduced to spirituality early on in San Francisco when I had just gotten back from Vietnam. And I was just, things had changed. So I wasn't in combat or anything, but I became a changed person. I'd spent a year in Saigon. And I came back a changed young man at 22. And I was looking for something other than what I had previously known before I went there. And I came across a Christian order, non-sectarian in San Francisco, that was very much about living the teachings of Jesus rather than talking about them. And that's when I was introduced to the Science of Mind textbook, which was one of the teaching tools we used in the order. And that became very much my core way of expressing spirituality through that discipline. Years later now, in the late 80s, I moved back to Santa Rosa from Chicago, or from being with my mother in Michigan. She was dying. I was caretaking her for 7 months. And I came out here to be with my daughter, who at the time was just turning 17. And I was introduced again to the Science of Mind philosophy through the Center for Spiritual Living here.
Oh, the one in Santa Rosa.
The one in Santa Rosa.
Yeah.
And I went through the training with them, and then basically used my background, and I affiliated with the Center for Spiritual Living as an ordained minister. Mm-hmm. And that happened in 2003. And so from there, I beg your pardon, 2003. My ministry became to go, it was an outreach ministry, to go to various centers throughout Northern California mostly, to fill in for where ministers were not there or needed a vacation or something like that.
You were a sub-minister.
I was, and I had some very interesting experiences. I'd go down once a month to Santa Cruz, and was like an interim minister for them, to support them. And I always enjoyed the ride down Highway 1 down to Santa Cruz. and it was a great community there, and I enjoyed it immensely. And I had the opportunity, before I was ordained, I was a minister, but I hadn't been ordained yet. Right after 9/11, I went in December of that year and went to the religious science community there, and to support them, and spoke there, and did some counseling with some of the people.
In New York City?
In New York City, yeah.
Oh,
and
that must have been quite an experience.
It was an extraordinary experience for me personally, and also I just felt I wanted to do something to be of service to the people that had been so close to that.
That experience sounds like a potential book to me.
Well, it touched me deeply, and
Yeah.
some of the counseling I did with a few of the people had actually lost loved ones in that tragedy. And this was only 3 months after that, and it was just so raw.
Yeah.
And I felt as though I could come in somewhat detached, being not there, and I just felt like I was, it was very beneficial, certainly for me, to be there, to be able to support people like that.
So are you presently still doing any ministry work?
I consider this my ministry. What happened, it encapsulated itself with my daughter dying. I got the rug pulled out from under me, and I really, even though I did go do some speaking after that, the wind had left my sails about going out into the world in that way.
Because she was helping you with the book.
Exactly, and I just needed time. And when I did get back into the book a year later, it was really cathartic for me. And so my ministry since that time has been an inward journey rather than an outward journey.
Yeah.
And now it is, again, part of an outward journey.
Yeah, but just a book can help a person.
That's some of the best feedback I've gotten is that from the people who've read it and some of the reviews is, it's a good read, and I enjoyed it immensely, and it left me feeling good about myself.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the best, that's certainly a good compliment.
I mean, you hear that a lot. It was fast read, it was good read, but I don't hear very often when somebody says, it left me feeling good about myself. That is a huge compliment.
Yes, and I take it that way. And why I resonate with it is it left me feeling good about myself when I finished it.
Oh.
And I wanted to convey, how rich that experience has been for me. I wanted to convey that through my book. And some of the feedback I've gotten is that was conveyed. And I can't, that is part of my healing process.
Huge compliments.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Well, let us hear a part from your wonderful mystery thriller.
I would love to. I've just pulled this out. It's going to be a short passage. But this is literally right in the first chapter after Professor Michael Drake visits his brother-in-law to look at the manuscript his brother-in-law has uncovered that his father had translated from classical Chinese. Michael tapped the edge of the tabletop. This is amazing. The legend of the Lotus Cross has persisted for centuries, but I'm not aware of any written document found to verify its existence. He touched the edge of the ancient manuscript bearing the Chinese characters. If this document is authentic, it may very well be the only one in existence that identifies the actual artifact. He turned to face Charles with a pensive stare. This is describing a treasure that possibly contains the residue of the blood of the risen Christ. Charles reacted by pulling back his shoulders. I'd never heard of this legend, he said as he turned his gaze to the document and the translated copy lying on the tabletop. There's very little known about it. I went online after we spoke this morning. there wasn't one reference to the Lotus Cross. How did you find out about this in the first place? Charles scratched the side of his head. Michael gazed at the manuscript and translated copy on the table in front of him. I only became aware of it because of my interest in the ancient trading routes between the East and the West. It seems the only reference to it is the folklore of local peoples that keeps the legend alive.
Very nice. I think that will inspire people to read on.
Oh, well, I hope so.
So are you thinking of a new book or a new sequel to this book?
Yes. In fact,
sometimes that happens, and then sometimes you want to write something completely different.
well, in my case, when I finished this book, a sequel presented, I just wanted to continue writing, but I knew this book was done. I mean, it had a punctuation mark on it, and there was no question about it in my mind's eye. But I wanted to move forward with it, so I started the sequel, and I've gotten a little bit into it, but the truth of the matter was I wasn't done with this yet, getting it produced and edited further and published and all that goes with that. And so I've actually put that aside for now, the sequel, although I'm starting to get tantalizing close to get back into it. I'm in the process of either going to produce the audiobook myself, I'm in the process of that, or consider having someone else do it. And the only consideration about that is not that I couldn't do it, but is it the best use of my time to produce the audiobook myself?
Yeah, I've studied that subject. Audiobooks are extremely valuable these days, and the libraries carry quite a lot. I know I've talked to many people who love audiobooks who travel.
Exactly.
You know, it's just fabulous to be listening to a book when you're traveling. But boy, when you further look into it, how many discs it make up one book, and talking for that length of time. And then you look into the production of having other people. It's like paying for a play in a way.
Right.
Because you may want many different voices.
Yeah, see, that's where I've actually gone through and produced, recorded myself 15 chapters complete.
Oh. And
edited them, but I think I would consider that my training period, because if I am going to do it myself, I am going to then begin now from chapter 1 and go and do it over again now that I've had the experience of getting it right, I think.
That's very impressive that you did 15 chapters. I don't usually hear that from authors.
Oh, yeah.
They'll try one or two and go, oh, this is exhausting.
Well, that it is, yeah. But I realized when I got that far into it that I'd better, and I've got a sample that's actually going to people that have, they are, I can't remember the name, ADX or something, that's part of Amazon. And they have a whole arm of Amazon that's for audiobooks. And I've looked on their webpage and it's very supportive. And so I just this morning, I did a sample of chapter 1, 5 minutes, 6 minutes of it. And I'm going to send that off for review to get feedback from the professionals. And then I'm going to make determinations about my moving forward myself, or possibly getting some others involved in it.
Well, that's quite a process, and I think audiobooks are very well received. I'm sure the audience would love a audiobook of the Lotus Cross.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
That's wonderful. Well, tell us, Where can we buy your book? Is it available on your website?
It is the lotuscross.com will direct to Facebook and also Facebook and Twitter. But more importantly, it'll take it to Amazon, and that's going to be the one I'm going to be going with in the future, probably exclusively.
Okay,
and it's a Kindle edition. It's on Amazon. It's in some of the independent bookstores locally here in Sonoma County, Copperfields, and in Marin County at Book Passage.
Good. But and people can buy it directly from your website?
They can. They'll be directed to where to buy it from.
Oh, good. And we will make sure that's listed, so that will be nice. Thank you very much for writing this amazing thriller, The Lotus Cross. And Ray Anderson, thank you for being on our show.
Thank you, Jeannie. It's been my pleasure.
WriterSpeak is produced by the Community Media Center of the North Bay. We would like to thank our sponsor, the Sonoma County Gazette. Please join us next time for a chat with another talented writer.